What an episode of Moon Knight. My goodness, no silly intro this time around. We're going to get right into it. Too many emotions to let it sit. What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. I've been waiting, feels like years, for this episode because I was able to watch the first 4 episodes within a week, and it's been about a month since then. So we finally have episode 5. All of the questions that we've had festering in our head, we're going to talk about it today, see if we got some answers, and then look forward to next week's season finale, which is ridiculous. I need so much more of this show, but thank you guys so much for being here. Hey, if you like these kinds of videos, let me know. Come back. We'll do a finale video next week, but let's start out at the beginning of this episode and picking right up with the reveal of the Egyptian moon goddess, aka the hippopotamus, at the end of episode 4. We were all able to kind of look into it over the span of a week and kind of see what this character was going to have to offer, but what we didn't know is the direction this episode would go and how it would be much more so of an introspective journey between Steven and Mark rather than something that gives us all of the answers to our questions. Now, one thing we do kind of have answers to at this point, and they make it very clear in the episode. We were wondering, are these memories that we are seeing throughout the first couple of episodes, or is everything happening in his head? And then what we see at this facility, Putnam Medical Facility in Chicago, well, is this all real and everything else is happening in Mark's brain? We get our answers fairly quickly when they're going to the different rooms and seeing the memories play out, referring to them as memories. So we can see what we were able to see once more referred to as something that actually happened. Now, whether or not we're able to piece together everything immediately, I'm still questioning the likes of Ethan Hawke's Arthur. Was he indeed this villainous presence on this side of the journey, or is he just playing this role at this medical facility in Chicago? That's something I'm still racking my brain over. But I kind of want to play it straightforward with this episode and go through the major events that we witnessed. The first big thing that is said here is talking about the Egyptian underworld, the journey to the afterlife, what they refer to as Duat, not duet, Duat, like the ancestral plane, an obvious reference there to what we see in Black Panther, and there was a lot of speculation as kind of what the inclusion of this Egyptian goddess would mean. Are we getting the underworld of this specific show? We've seen a lot of underworlds in Marvel thus far, and if you dive into the comics, there are many, many more. But the answer to that question, and we learned this right off the bat, is yes, we are getting to see what the underworld is like. And really the journey of this entire episode is to see if they get to make it to what is almost like the ancestral plane in Black Panther. And we see that beautiful moment at the end. So the answer is yes, barring some heartbreak in there, which we'll get into. But the way that that is referred to and just kind of the journey to get to that point essentially takes up this episode, so we don't really get our questions answered. But the questions that we do get answered are questions that I didn't even know I had, but it's a beautiful way to showcase his backstory. And essentially, this episode is all about perceiving what you want to perceive, because we will cut back to Arthur essentially trying to help Mark and walk Mark through, and inevitably we see Steven have a little conversation with him at the end, but try to get him out of this mental state that it feels like all of this is happening in his head, like the way that this is playing out, this journey to find himself, this very introspective journey that I never anticipated Moon Knight focusing on almost all the way through the series. But it's a beautiful showcase of that, still not quite answering all of our questions or revealing that final personality that was teased and has been teased for multiple episodes now. But the way that it all plays out is beautiful. And we get these reveals and these terms that we kind of need to know, whether that be the field of reeds or balancing the scales when she pulls out their hearts and she's wondering why everything's not right and what this quite means. But it's up to this journey to kind of find out why these characters are in the state that they are in. They must balance the scales. Again, an introspective journey. And we start to see these memories play out, and they are memories, so like I said, we're going to assume that they are real at this point. But we're also learning more about Khonshu in the process. We actually see the origins, the first time that Mark suits up as Moon Knight, and Khonshu kind of taking advantage of this character who was in a terrible state, a terrible mental state at the time, and Steven even looks at him and says, you know he's just taking advantage of you. Like, it's obvious to everyone in the room, viewers included, that this was all just part of this scheme to get someone who was down emotionally to do the dirty work. And we see the results of the dirty work when they walk into the room and see essentially all of the souls, the bodies of the victims of Moon Knight. And sure, it feels as if they deserve it, but knowing that Khonshu was taking advantage of someone who was in this state was pretty bad. But the question is, why was he in this state in the first place? Well, we come to realize, and this is what this episode was all about, that there was a tragic backstory with his mother and a little adventure that he went on with his brother, and it turned out to be something that Mark never anticipated happening. He loses his brother, and his mother blames him for it. So we see multiple memories, examples of this. Celebrating his birthday by himself, his mother beating on the door at one point, blaming him, and we get some conversations between Mark and Steven. My mother beat me, and essentially Steven was a way for Mark to get away from this. In turn, an entirely new personality was created. But Steven has always been under the assumption that, and we see the conversations with his mother, under the assumption that everything was okay on that front, didn't really know anything about that entire situation. So once he is getting all of this revealed, and we also see that these personalities, they started to blend together once their mother died. Everything about this starting in the first place, like, why is this all of a sudden blending together? Why has life been so easy for them? Well, sort of, not really, up until this point. And then they begin to discover that there are multiple personalities. Well, that's the reason. It was the death of his mother, struggling to cope with that. We get a beautiful scene where he's just looking into the window of the funeral, and the emotion of Oscar Isaac to display at that point, going from full-on tears and this sense of, like, dread to, okay, I have no clue what's going on because I'm an entirely different person now. It's one of the better scenes, performances in general, I've seen from anyone in Marvel. Oscar Isaac just crushed it in that moment. But that backstory, it's present and it's fluid all throughout this episode, getting a look, a peek into those beautiful but tragic moments, seeing why Mark and Steven are the way they are, and the imagery that follows that, you know, whether it be seeing the bodies, the lives that he has taken, or learning and seeing the temple of Khonshu was cool enough, and that transformation was great, but then learning that Khonshu was full-on taking advantage of him at his weakest moment when he was so close to death, using him to fulfill everything that we see in prior episodes. That's emotional in itself. But then we get into the end of this episode, and the fight was pretty cool. It's like a bunch of zombies on this cruise ship. Not real. That's not what it was. But it was interesting to see Steven kind of gain that confidence, saying, "You've got this. But if I'm you, then I've got this too." And I love seeing that confidence on display. But we know that if they don't make it to that point, if they don't make it to that ancestral plane, well, then it's not going to turn out all good and well. And it doesn't, because Steven falls off the boat and Steven turns into stone. I thought it was sand at first. Looks more like stone. Regardless, at that point, the scales were balanced, and Mark essentially found peace at that moment, which is so interesting to me, because where is he now? And a lot of this could still be mental, but at the same time, he was dying. This was his journey into the afterlife. Is this where he stays? We know we have another episode. Or was this all just this mental journey to get rid of Stephen and become Mark as a whole? But we know that there is another personality locked away. And I'm going to assume that personality is Jake Lockley, whom we will hopefully see in the next episode and maybe get a mental battle. We had the two personalities coming together. Maybe we see the opposite in the next episode. But I think our big question that we're left with at the end of this episode, getting a lot of backstory explained to us and realizing that a lot of what we've seen, they do count as memories, as far as we know. But we still have the question of, okay, if Arthur is over here as this villainous character, and we're seeing this fictional story play out, this treasure hunting movie in the same vein of what we saw in the previous episode, what is happening at this mental hospital? What is actually fiction? What is fact? What is real? What is not? And hopefully it all comes together in the next episode. But what we were able to see here was Mark reaching that destination, that ancestral plane, and it was a beautiful sight to see. It was a wonderful moment. We felt a sense of calmness and a sense of peace after this sense of dread when we got that emotion of him, basically that personality dying at that moment. Is that the last we will see of Stephen, of that character? That's my question to you all. So we're going to come back next week. We're going to see how it all plays out, how it all turns out, and how it all comes together. Are the scales balanced? Will they stay balanced? Are we going to get a big showdown, or will it be more of a Professor X internal battle? That, for me, is just as interesting, if not more so. I've talked a lot, but there was so much to this episode, and again, man, the emotions of that final scene. I was devastated. I was in a state of sadness for about 5 to 10 minutes after it was over. You guys are truly the best. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, the best way to let me know is by hitting that like down below. It helps the algorithm. Appreciate it. I'll see you soon.